the ride is just so much different. Boston Whaler makes a great boat. Pursuit, Tierra Yachts is in that category as well. If you're strictly looking for something that is good for a large group of people, tri-tunes are really the way to go.
So what is a boat survey?
I mean, kind of like a home inspection. So there's accredited marine surveyors, and there's not very many. There's 2 in Traverse City. The buyer hires them to come in and inspect both out of water typically and on water. So it's if it's a big boat like this, they get it pulled out on that lift. The guy does all sorts of tests and checks and figures and all sorts of stuff on the hull. Checking integrity, gets down when we go out on the water, they're checking everything on the engines, drives, all that stuff. And then they get a 20-page report or whatever on all the surveyor's findings and use that to kind of determine, hey, do I want to move forward? Do we need to renegotiate price based on stuff that needs to be fixed or something? But again, that's all, that's buyer side. And you'll get people that come back to me as like the listing agent or the listing broker and want same thing. Well, you need to tell your guy we're dropping at 10K, and it's like, no, your surveyor didn't find the whatever you're referring to.
Well, we're kind of jumping into this sooner than I thought. But So, do you work as a seller's broker on the selling side, so listing the boat for sale, and then do you also represent buyers on the buying side?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, and you can do both sides, which happens sometimes. I mean, not all the time, but. Again, very similar to real estate. Like my friend comes and they want to sell their boat, don't want to deal with the hassle, whatever it is. They list it with me. I advertise it, try to find buyers, Facebook, Craigslist, Yacht World, Boat Trader, all those things. Oftentimes there's somebody that they kind of know what they want. They don't want to spend the time like looking for it and vetting different options. So they come to me and say, hey, I want this make and model, kind of this year range. Can you find that for me? And then I go out and, kind of do that vetting and act as the expert, so to speak, where, I'm doing the research to say, you don't really want this model year, they had issues with this manufacturing process, that kind of thing. You might want to look at something a few years newer. These engines were kind of bogus for a couple of years there. You don't want that. You want, this other thing.
So like real estate agents, you're knowledgeable up to a point, but you can't go beyond into what a boat surveyor is doing.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. I'm very clear about that up front. I don't have the technical background to get into the nitty gritty with like engines and, service things, that kind of aspect to it.
And that is your commission. Like one of the things that's an interesting thing about real estate is there's this assumption that the price is somehow set from some governmental agency or set from outside. It's absolutely not. It's all negotiable. But it kind of falls into a range. And in the Traverse City area, it's about 2.5% for the listing side, 2.5% for the buyer side, or somewhere of a total of 5%. Or as high as 6%. So based on, is that something that really varies from boat to boat, or is there sort of like an industry standard on what people can expect to pay a broker to help either buy or sell a boat?
Depends a little bit on region even. In the Great Lakes, it's typically 10% of the sale price, but you'll find, 5 or 6, some brokers or some independent places will do 5 or 6 as a total and then do a split if there's a co-broker situation.
And I'm sure it depends on the boat. In real estate, a lot of the percentage will be different sometimes for vacant land. Lower priced properties maybe would have a higher percentage versus if you're selling a multi-million dollar, because that's where percentages and nominal figures start to change the calculation a little bit. Tell us a bit about your background and how you got into the boat sales industry.
Yeah, so, born and raised in northern Michigan. I have photos of when I was 2 weeks old out on my parents' boat. So I just kind of have grown up in this world and kind of lifestyle, so to speak. So when I was making a career change a handful of years ago, it just kind of seemed logical to get into something that was more fun. It's a pretty laid-back industry for the most part. I get to be out on the water a ton of time during the summer, even into the spring and fall occasionally. So it's just something that I really enjoy doing. It was not something that was on my radar. I think going into college and even a few years after that, but once it kind of became apparent that you could, make a living and enjoy your time and have fun with what you were doing, it was kind of a no-brainer. So
yeah. Yeah. How long you been doing it?
So this would be year 7 for me.
Yes.
So
Okay. At that time where you're not cutting your teeth anymore and you haven't gotten old, and do you have any particular specialty, or is it pretty much as the specialty sort of determined by the region?
I'd say right now, just based on kind of my setup here at the marina, trailer boats tend to be a little bit more simple because I don't have the service team and the kind of the service side behind me. And that's more of a kind of a long-term goal here. So anything that's on a trailer, fishing boats, pontoons, small cruisers, that kind of thing. Those are just a little easier to manage right now as an individual broker. But I have experience up to, 45, 50 feet, $1 million in that range price-wise. So, I like to think that I can kind of handle anything and everything, and have, so far it's been interesting kind of venturing out on my own now to see the reception from both small boat owners and the larger boat owners. There's always kind of this excitement over a new venture, so people have been really supportive, and I've had a lot of positive feedback, but most of the activity so far has been kind of that sub 28 or 30 foot on trailers. So,
Yeah.
But again, anything, pontoons, fishing boats, center consoles, all that stuff.
Yeah, by the way, I've, it's been a while. It's been since my kids were younger. And of course, now I'm a grandpa, by the way, as of July 1st last year. So Cece, my granddaughter, will be 1-year-old July 1st. So we're thinking about boating again as a family because of having little ones. Certainly by the time she's 5, 6, it'll be time to have a boat.
Sure.
And what has caught my eye is I think they're Sea-Doos, the pontoons that are kind of like modules that you can move. Have you sold any of those? Or?
I have not. You haven't seen a ton of those in our area quite yet, and I'm not sure why that is, but yeah, it's a great concept. It kind of takes the versatility of pontoons, but gives you a little more excitement, I'd say. You've got the jet powered engine, which is a little quicker to plane. It's just a little more exciting experience, I think, than a traditional pontoon. And then the modular factor is interesting too, because you get a little more versatility with seating arrangements and that kind of thing. So I've not been on one, but I've certainly seen it.
That's what drew my attention, because I thought to myself, well, there are times when we want to go out with another couple or another set of couples, and it's just about the adults, right? So you want to have seats, Then there are other times I'm thinking I'd like to have just straight shots so so my grandkids can run and jump off the thing like a dock, you know? And then I saw somebody pulling out, actually right across the street here at Speedway, pulling out with one of those, and it caught my attention.
Sure.
So I Googled it, kind of went down a rabbit hole. Those look pretty cool.
Yeah.
But back to the trailer boats versus boats that aren't trailered. The boats that aren't trailered really have to be connected with like a boatyard. Is that right? Or
marina for sure. Obviously it helps if those are in a slip on the water, and then having proximity to either, a maintenance facility or what we have here at the marina in Traverse City, a lift or a mobile structure that hauls the boat out of the water in case you're doing some sort of inspection or survey. So it doesn't need to be tied to a specific boat yard per se, but to have proximity to, a maintenance facility or a haul out facility is certainly a plus.
So I'm not in that level of boat ownership, or am likely to be, but a boat yard is basically like the mechanic shop where the boat's going to either go to be inspected or fixed. And sometimes like Northport Bay Boat Yard, they're a combination. They'll pull your boat out and store it, right? But because it's not being trailered, it's not going in and out. It's basically, it goes in and at least stays until the whole season. So they need a marina to be able to store the boat in the
water
season, in the water.
Yep.
Okay.
And there are a couple places here locally that offer, in and out service. For bigger boats, it's a little more limited, but that's something I think our area could certainly use more of, is, the ability to just call up, have them launch the boat for you. Just because of the kind of the geography and the layout, specifically here in Traverse City, there are not many places that have the ability to haul a boat and service it or store it directly on site. Typically their service yard or storage facilities are, a couple miles away. Whereas, as you mentioned, Northport Bay, they do have all of those capabilities all in one location. It's just a real estate issue. I'm sure there are more developers or folks like that would be interested in putting in an all-encompassing boatyard that offers haul-out service, storage, all on the water. But as you know, that gets expensive when you're looking at, Lake Michigan real estate to try to do that.
Not only expensive, but the permitting's got to be almost impossible.
Yep.
I would think.
You hear of, absolutely, multi-year permit processes to even get plans approved, and then, a couple more years to actually get the, a marina or a storage facility built.
All right, so let's talk about buying a boat.
Sure.
What are the most popular types of boats for sale in this area, in the Traverse City area?
Yeah, so Traverse City area, the last probably 10 years or so, pontoons and tritoons have just been huge. They've exploded in popularity. You're still seeing that. The new boat buying has slowed a little bit the last probably 18 months. Just as costs have gone up on new boats, people seem to be kind of holding on to, their used pontoon, tritoon, fishing boat, whatever it may be. But yeah, you see...
Economy related, do you think?
Yeah, probably a little bit of economy related, but also just, specific to the price of new boats. It's kind of that trickle down where fewer people are buying new. So they're looking for quality used, 2 or 3 years old, low hours, well maintained. So, but again, the pontoons and tritoons are just everywhere. You're seeing a lot more of those as manufacturers build larger tritoons on big water, even here on West Grand Traverse Bay, which is still Lake Michigan. It's not an inland lake, which is a misunderstanding people have sometimes. You see a lot of pontoons and tritoons out on West Bay. So it's a popular style, and it checks a lot of boxes for families, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, my cousin has a pontoon boat. Northport Bay and Omina Bay are basically where he's going, And,
Sure.
And it's, people have, selling real estate, you can... Suttons Bay, Omina Bay, Northport Bay, docks, there's no way on the Lake Michigan side you could have a dock. The wave action would just pummel it.
Right. Yep.
But yeah, to your point, a lot of pontoons, but they're just going to stay in the bay. They're not going to Charlevoix.
No, no. I'm sure there's somebody out there that's done that, but I'm not aware of anybody that I know.
I'm sure there's a daredevil. Yeah, so let's talk about first-time boat buyers. First-time home buyers. There's a lot of advice for them in particular because that's kind of like a niche, right, buyer. What advice do you have for first-time boat buyers when they're looking to purchase a boat?
Sure. Yeah, given the amount of inventory that's out there right now, it's certainly a buyer's market specific to new stuff, and even, or specific to used inventory, but also new. Manufacturing is caught up to where, dealers are sitting on a new boat inventory. So take your time, pick what's going to fit best for you long term. It's tough to see people come in with one idea and then kind of get stuck into something that they aren't using as much as they thought they would, or maybe doesn't fit the needs of their family. But that's part of what my role is, to kind of help people figure out what's kind of the dream boat ownership scenario versus what's the practical boat ownership scenario. If somebody's coming to me and saying, hey, we're going to do overnights every weekend, and we're going to go to Mackinac Island, and we're going to do this and do that, it's can be a conversation to kind of give them a sense of the reality of that. It costs a lot to fill a boat with gas and make some of those long trips. We kind of recommend what's your 90% use going to be rather than your 10% use. You may only end up taking one trip all summer and doing an overnight or a long weekend. So it may not make sense to go with that cruiser style boat. You may get more enjoyment out of even a pontoon or a tritoon or a smaller open bow boat. So kind of having that, like I said, reality check conversation with the buyers is part of what makes a broker important.
Yeah, that knowledgeable expert to have a conversation with, and they can help you really narrow down. I find that a lot when I'm trying to buy technical equipment, whether it's computers or whatever.
Sure.
Having a conversation with someone who can say, well, what are you going to use it for? And go back and forth, and then you settle in on something.
Yep.
So we've already kind of talked about this, but are there any specific brands or models that are particularly well suited for the Traverse City area?
Sure. So I'm a big Boston Whaler fan. My wife and I have a small 180 Dauntless that we love. So those center consoles are something that are gaining in popularity up north. A lot of people think of those as strictly fishing boats, which may be the case, down south in the, Florida, the Carolinas. But up here they serve really kind of a dual purpose. You get that adventure side if you want to take friends out fishing or whatever you can, but they're great for tubing. They do tend to offer a better ride quality. So if you're out in a little bit of chop or catch some inclement weather, it's a more comfortable ride typically. So I really, that's kind of my favorite style of boat, center consoles. Boston Whaler makes a great boat. Pursuit, Tierra Yachts is in that category as well. If you're strictly looking for something that is good for a large group of people, tri-toons are really, the way to go. They're just so much different than what you may have remember if you grew up, on a 20-foot pontoon 20 or 25 years ago.
Tri-toon means just another thing in the middle.
Correct. Yep. So instead of just the two, you've got that third tune in the middle. The ride is just so much different, and especially with that center tune, you can put bigger power on the back, so you can really get into some of those water sports that families like to do, tubing, skiing, wakeboarding. Even I've been out on a tri-tune with friends and taken some guys wakeboarding. So that really checks a lot of boxes for people with larger families, or if you think you're taking a group of 6, 8, 10 people out. So
yeah, because as I'm thinking about my next boat, I'm thinking about versatility being the number one thing. Being able to have, when the kids or grandkids are little, jumping off, being able to also then go out with a couple of couples, just have some drinks on the boat. But also when the kids get a little older, then maybe trying to teach them how to water ski and tube or whatever, right?
Yep.
And a cabin cruiser is not the best for that, probably.
Sure.
Right?
Yep. And that's it.
But I'm also not going to Charlevoix in my tri-tune.
Yeah, most likely not. And it just depends on where you're going to be using it to. There's so many different styles and so many different sizes of pontoons and tri-toons. If you're using it on a small inland lake, you're probably looking at something, a pontoon might be fine. But if you are going to be on East Bay, West Bay, boating at all in Lake Michigan, even like a Torch Lake, that's a bigger body of water, tri-toon is definitely the way to go in my opinion.
How does the boating season in the Traverse City area affect the buying process? I mean, obviously there's an off season, right?
Yeah, there's certainly an off season. The buying season really actually starts to heat up in, call it February or March, when some of those bigger, statewide or regional boat shows happen. And those are specific typically to new boats, but that kind of gets people excited about the upcoming season. And that's when you see more activity on the buy side, and even on the listing side. So if is wanting to sell their boat, that's kind of when they're starting to look, because they know they need to take advantage of kind of that pre-summer selling season, because a lot of times if somebody has the idea to sell their boat end of June into July, buyers are looking at it like, oh well, I only have a month left of time to use it, I'm just going to hold off until the next season. So it is important if you're entertaining the idea of selling, I would suggest the earlier the better, just to take advantage of those people that are wanting to use whatever they're going to buy all summer.
What are the key considerations if someone's thinking about buying a boat and they're trying to decide, should I buy new or should I buy used?
Yeah, with new boats, there's warranty of varying lengths. So if you're somebody that's conscious about repair costs and that kind of thing, it can be an advantage to buy new. You're also not getting somebody else's mistake, so to speak. It can be tricky given the amount of inventory out there. You might fall in love with something. Making sure you have a used boat inspected, both mechanically and if need be a marine survey, is important to maybe uncover some of those things that had been overlooked from a service standpoint, or even if somebody's run aground or something like that, and it may not be visibly apparent while you're conducting your buying process. To have an expert there to kind of look and notice those things is certainly important. You don't want to get caught with a boat that's got major issues that maybe aren't visible but couldn't be hidden and discovered by an inspection.
So you mentioned there seem to be at least two parts of an overall inspection, and that would be the inspection of the mechanical parts of the boat, and then you said a marine survey. So I'm surmising that means looking at the condition of the hull, looking at the overall boat, the structural integrity, if you will, of the overall boat, separate from how the engine's running.
Yep. So a mechanical inspection would be something that your local, dealer or boat yard should be able to conduct. You might do a compression test just to make sure that all the cylinders are firing correctly. An inspection of the drive. They can do an oil test, that kind of thing, just to make sure the mechanical pieces of the boat are functioning as they should. And they will typically go through and check electrical systems as well. So, if the boat has a chart plotter or a GPS unit, is that functioning as it should? Whereas a marine survey is going to typically be for larger vessels for the most part. And the marine surveyor is going to come in and he's going to check the hull, check the stringers, those structural components to the boat to make sure there's no voids or things that are going to cause issues, later on. That, again, you might not be able to look at it with the naked eye, but a marine surveyor is going to come in and be able to find those things.
And then your role in that process is that, you're, I imagine that the process would work similar to a real estate deal, that you go under contract, either representing the buyer or the seller. There's then the possibility of a contingency within that contract for an inspection and a marine survey.
Yep.
And then you decide after that's done, then the buyer has a choice within a certain number of days probably to renegotiate, accept it in its current condition, or walk away.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
And what do you see most often as a result of inspections?
Sure. It's really all about setting expectations too. So both as the listing broker or the selling broker, making sure that especially new boaters, folks that have not owned a boat before, really understand how the process works. So laying out that timeline, like you mentioned, hey, you're going to put a deposit down, we're going to have these contingencies, and contingencies might be a marine survey, they might be a mechanical inspection, they might be a lake test, making sure they understand what that timeline is going to be, and then following through and communicating with both sides. If you're representing the buyers, you're communicating with the listing broker. My job is also to introduce or provide contact information for surveyors if people don't bring their own to the deal. So I have that list and that ability to help them make those connections. Ultimately, the inspections and the surveyors are hired by the buyers to represent them. So I'm really acting as a facilitator in all pieces of the potential deal. So
a lake test is similar to a test driving a car, but done.
Yes.
You take the boat out
Yep.
of the lake.
Yep, and that could
how it
be.
maneuvers.
Yep, yeah, because again, if you're a new boater and you haven't been out on a boat in a long time or ever even, you want to take that out and make sure it's a comfortable ride. Everything's working as it should. Everybody in the family's on board with that type or that style of boat, and that can be something that doesn't happen very frequently. But if you get to a lake test, typically you're probably going to follow through with the purchase unless something is totally out of whack with an engine or a drive or something. That's kind of the last step in the process almost before you close, is to do that lake test.
Are you usually on the boat with them when they're doing the lake test if they're your client?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Typically, if it's a used boat that's listed with me, I'm representing the seller if it's listed with me. So I'm going to be there throughout the process, make sure everything goes smoothly. If I'm representing both sides of the deal, ultimately we're trying to come to an agreement. And again, make sure everybody's on the same page, make sure all the steps in the process have been communicated. And then there is that potential to renegotiate the agreed upon price based on the outcome of a lake test or a survey. But I'm really there, again, boating is supposed to be fun. It should be a fun process. You shouldn't, end up with both sides being relatively happy. So
yeah. All right, so let's talk about the selling side.
Sure.
If someone's considering selling their boat, what steps do they need to take to prepare their boat for sale?
So, one of the things that is really important, and I think this is not all that dissimilar to real estate, where curb appeal is important. If you're listing a home or selling a home, making sure your boat is visually appealing, get it buffed and waxed, get it detail cleaned, make sure the tires are pumped up if it's on a trailer, all of those things that as a prospective buyer is approaching your boat, it's not going to set off any alarms. If it's covered in leaves, it's got sap everywhere, it's got a flat tire, those are things that are just, immediate red flags to potential buyers or brokers that are kind of doing a pre-inspection for you. So that curb appeal, so to speak, is really important. If you've owned the boat for a handful of years, having maintenance records or service records can be make or break for some buyers. So typically if you're a high use boater, you're doing 50, 60, 70 hours a summer, having oil changes every year or at least every other season, lube oil filter, all of those different things with the drives and engines is important. If you have a written record of that, that's something that a lot of buyers will ask for very early in the buying process. So to be able to provide that to, if it's me as the listing broker or the buyer, if you're going the private sale route, service history is very important. So.
Yeah. It is, I would think it's a strong indicator for how well the boat was cared for previously, right?
Yeah.
And if they don't have the service records and the boat doesn't look well kept, then it's not going to garner a premium price, right?
Yeah, exactly.
How can sellers determine the fair market value, or how do you help the sellers? How is the fair market value determined of a used boat?
Yeah, again, not all that dissimilar to real estate. We're using online resources that for the most part are available to anyone. It's not specific to a broker or a dealer, but Yacht World, Boat Trader, Boats.com, even Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. We're gathering a list of as many comps as we can find, comparable boats, and it doesn't have to be that exact make and model, but a similar size, similar setup, similar make or model, presenting that to the seller, having those conversations about what's been sold recently. My experience going back 7 years now, you get a little bit of a history as far as previous sales that I may have conducted. So really it's just all about information. There are also sources out there similar to car sales, NADA, Kelley Blue Book values. Those are or can be a little misleading because they're not as up to speed as the current market. That information may have been published in January and now here we are in June, and the market could have changed pretty drastically for a used boat. So that's one of those things that it can be helpful to kind of find a very base price, but really you're looking at comps on the market at the time you're looking to list your boat for sale.
Yeah, it's amazing. You mentioned that about Kelley Blue Book, about that they're looking in the rear view mirror. I had an instance I had come across when I had represented a really good client, represented her on a few deals. She came across this for sale by owner off Little Travers Lake. And the gal considering selling it for sale by owner, she had 2 lots, was gonna sell them, had it appraised by a professional appraiser, $250,000 each. She calls me and says, "Hey Sandra, this for sale by owner gal doesn't want to deal with agents, but I want to get your opinion." I said, "Scoop that up for $250 just as quick as you possibly can." Sure. Well, at the 11th hour, the seller's sister comes in and says, "Nope, we're gonna take it to the market. We're gonna use an agent." And they used an agent that was a friend of theirs. And she listed it, I want to say, for $350 a piece. And they sold, both lots sold together for a total of $900,000. So the appraiser, similar to your Kelley Blue Book story about seeing the past, the appraiser's looking at comps that were 6 months to a year old, and the market had gone nuts in the meantime. And so, that's a lesson about paying. People complain about the commission. People in, whether they're working with boat brokers or whatever, some just want to focus on what I'm paying that individual and feeling the cost of that. In this case, I think they used an agent, would have cost them about $50,000, but they made $400,000 more. So they netted a total of $350,000. Now, is that working with an agent worth it?
Yeah. So, there is, to an extent, people have some success going the private sale with boats. You can put stuff on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace pretty easily yourself. But again, that idea of finding a value and putting it out to a broader spectrum of buyers is where a broker can come in handy. Yeah. And I use the example the number of times where they may be talking to a couple different brokers or a couple different dealers. They get one price from this person or that organization and another price from me or from a different broker. And it's one of those where it always feels good to end up at a sale price that was at or greater to the other person's listing price. So it's all about relationships and trying to find the right person ultimately, but there is some additional value just with kind of the network that brokers can have. So. Yeah. And I expect the people's boats, it's a little bit
it's different from selling a car, although some people get attached to their automobiles too. But I would think it's more like selling a home, that you can have some people, there's so many good memories on a boat.
Yeah.
That it can be kind of probably an emotional experience for some sellers.
I would say there's certainly more emotion involved, because I've certainly had a number of times where people have approached me to sell their boat in tears, literally in tears, because they, their kids grew up on it. They had such a great experience. Maybe it was, inherited from a grandparent or something. And it's that emotional connection to boating, and those memories are what people think about when they're getting ready to sell.
I grew up on Northport Bay. My grandpa and grandma Nelson had waterfront property on Suttons Bay out at CenterPointe. And now all those properties are out of the family, and I feel that same way. Like, man, I was a spoiled little brat as a kid. I had no idea how spoiled I was until now that I don't have access to those properties. I just took it for granted, I see that with some of the, like, I just sold a house on Northport Bay. It was owned by 2 aunts and 2 nieces, and it was a really semi-traumatic experience because they had just reached a point where they couldn't afford to own it anymore. And the aunts wanted to sell because they were at an age where it made sense to do it. The nieces really didn't want to, but also understood. But it was very emotional for them. We already talked about how time of year impacts. What documentation or paperwork is really a necessary part when considering selling a boat?
So again, going back to that service history is important. If you've got that, it just kind of helps. If you're going private sale, helps you kind of organize your thoughts around how to promote the boat. Providing that to the listing broker is important. Other than that, there's a listing agreement. Typically, a place is going to ask for at least a copy of the title of the boat, title of the trailer, if the trailer has a title. Up-to-date registration is important in the event that if I bring a buyer to the table and the boat's not registered properly, legally, I shouldn't take it out on a lake test. It should be registered. If I take it out and it's not registered properly and I get pulled over, I'm in trouble, you're in trouble. So, making sure you're up to date on all those state requirements is important.
So obviously, if you're representing a seller and their boat's outside of the registration period, that would be one thing you'd be telling them is you need to get the boat registered in order to properly sell this.
Yes. And understanding even in a used boat situation, if somebody comes to me and there's a lien on the boat, having all that proper documentation from the bank is important, just so I'm aware of what I'm getting myself into, if there's a payoff, that kind of thing. So being able to represent that fairly to the prospective buyers is important.
Let's talk boat maintenance and storage. What are the essential maintenance tasks that new boat owners or people that are considering buying a boat, what are the essential maintenance tasks that they need to keep up on? You kind of already mentioned service history and those kinds of things, but what should they be ready to do from a maintenance perspective before buying a boat?
Sure. Yeah, so it depends a little bit on use. Average number of hours that Northern Michigan boaters are going to put on their boat is maybe 20 to 30, which is pretty low. Myself, my wife and I, we're in that kind of 60 to 70 range every summer, the 3 summers that we've had our boat. With that number, that higher number, if you're over 50 or 60 hours, you should probably be doing oil change, lower unit lube, filters, all of those things on your engine seasonally. If you're less than that, every other year is recommended. If you start to stretch that out a little bit, engines are meant to run, they're meant to be used. So if a boat is sitting in a barn, unused with the same gas, same oil, same lubes for 2 or 3 or 4 seasons, that can start to be problematic. So again, it's a little bit dependent on usage, but for the most part, every season or every other year, you should be looking at doing some of those basic things like oil changes. So.
Okay. What about winterizing boats in Northern Michigan? What goes into that?
So again, that depends a little bit on kind of what you're looking to get out of your storage. There's typically 3 storage options. So you can do indoor heated, which you don't need to, from a technical standpoint, winterize your boat. But there are some, again, depending on size, depending on number of engines, that kind of thing, there are some kind of maintenance items that would go into that. If the boat's got a water system, they're going to flush all the water out of that and probably will put antifreeze in just in the event that your heated storage building loses power or something, it's not going to freeze. A cold storage building, you're going to get everything winterized. If it's got a water system, again, if it's an outboard engine, typically newer outboards are going to be self-draining, so there's not a huge amount of maintenance that goes into that, but they can also get fogged, and there is a process for that. So again, it's a little up to you as the owner, kind of, if you want to go above and beyond, you're getting it fully winterized. At that time, you're probably going to get your oil change. You're going to do the filters and lube again. Or if you're doing outdoor storage, it's all of those winterization things in addition to being shrink wrapped. And the cost of those can vary pretty wildly from dealer to dealer or from storage yard or boat yard to boat yard. So shop around, try to find something that is licensed and insured. Obviously, you don't necessarily want to be taking it to somebody that's just doing it out of their garage unless they're a friend and you kind of know their background. But there are so many options in northern Michigan to go and have those storage and end of season services done. Certainly shop around and find.
And that's also a value add that you can provide because
So yeah, I can do a little bit of the vetting for that. I do have some kind of handshake agreements with service and storage yards around the area at the moment. And a lot of that is just having worked with them for the last 7 years, getting to know the work that they do. So I can certainly make recommendations with those.
What financing options are you aware of for people considering purchasing a boat?
Yeah, if you're going new or used through a dealer, typically dealers are going to have an internal F&I person, not all that dissimilar from a car dealership. My recommendation is typically, go check with your bank or credit union first. Just you've got an existing relationship. There are places that maybe don't do boat loans, but for the most part, the banks and credit unions here locally that I'm aware of do offer those services. Get a quote from your bank, your credit union. You can take that back to the dealer and just kind of compare notes and compare costs. If it's a private sale situation, same idea. You can go to your credit union and get those numbers. That's something that I did when we bought our boat. I financed a piece of it. I just went to Lake Michigan Credit Union where I had my mortgage at the time, car loan, and just got a little bit of a discount because I had those other things with Lake Michigan Credit Union. So.
Yeah. Okay. You said F&I, does that mean financing and insurance?
Yep.
An internal F&I?
Yep. Okay. Yeah, internal F&I. And again, you can do insurance the same way. If you've got your auto loan or auto insurance or home insurance with a broker or something, give them a shot at giving you a good number on the boat insurance as well.
That's where the big bundle comes in.
You bundle and save, I guess.
Yeah. So lifestyle and community. What are the best boating destinations in northern Michigan?
Sure. Here locally, if you're a boater out on West Bay, Power Island is the spot. Everybody talks about Power Island. If you go out there on a Saturday or Sunday in July or August, there's 100, 200 boaters out there enjoying the sandbar out there. Torch Lake is the other one that people outside of the area kind of flock to, and I know a lot of locals will tend to avoid that at certain times of the summer, but it's a beautiful spot. And one of the fun things about being in northern Michigan and being on what I'll call the big lake, being on Lake Michigan, you can go from Traverse City to Suttons Bay to Northport over to Charlevoix, again, if you've got a big enough vessel. So there's just so many options to get out and explore and see northern Michigan from an angle that you wouldn't normally, if you're just driving around the area and checking things out from the road.
Are there any boating clubs or organizations locally?
Yeah, you'll find there's kind of some informal cruising clubs. There's a group of friends here at the marina just north of us. You identify them because they've all got Burgees with their club logo on them. But they'll go out and do a couple cruises every summer. I don't know that it's exclusive necessarily, other than, it's just folks from that marina for the most part. So there are those informal groups or organizations. I'm not really aware of any a lot of dealers used to put on a cruise, typically late summer, where the dealership would organize that. That's kind of gone by the wayside a little bit since all the, COVID the last couple of years. But yeah, there's nothing stopping you from getting a group of friends together and planning a cruise or planning an anchorage for a day.
Are there any events or festivals that really are must go to in a boat? I know a lot of people like to go out in their boat and watch the fireworks in Northport or that kind of thing.
Yeah, fireworks. I have done this in the past, but during Cherry Festival here in Traverse City, it can be fun to go anchor off the open space. You can't really see the concerts necessarily, but you can listen to the concerts and just kind of hang out there for the afternoon. There are local boat shows. The Bay Harbor boat show is coming up in mid-June. That's a fun one just to kind of go and experience. On-water boat shows are a little more fun than, visiting a convention center or something like that. So
that's in Petoskey?
Bay Harbor.
Yep.
Yeah, it's Father's Day weekend, I think, so it's a good
So
opportunity to go.
there's a boat show just in that marina there?
Yeah, Bay Harbor Lake Marina. There's probably a dozen or so dealers that bring new boat inventory. There might be some used boats up there too, but it's a beautiful setting, obviously, and there's a lot of fun stuff
Yeah, cool.
in the water. So.
Okay. Legal and regulatory questions. What are the key boating laws and regulations in Michigan that both buyers and sellers need to be aware of?
Sure. I think the big one is kind of circling back to that idea of having the boat properly registered. There are folks that want to try to take advantage of registering their boat in a different state or something where, maybe there's a tax advantage to that. But in the state of Michigan, if the boat's going to live here, it needs to be registered in state. You need to pay your state registration fees. It needs to have your MC number on the side of the boat. You can also, and this is kind of more specific to larger vessels, but get what's called a Coast Guard registration, which is a little more intensive of a process, but that's one way to register your boat without having to go through the state of Michigan. Those boats don't have those MC numbers on the side. They're typically going to have their Coast Guard registration number somewhere on the interior of the vessel. But yeah, the big one I would say is making sure your registration's up to date. You've got the correct year stickers on your boat. If it's a trailer boat, making sure you've got the trailer plate. I know a lot of folks try to take advantage of not registering their trailer just because they may only use it 1 or 2 times this summer. But
They just hope they don't get caught?
yeah, hoping they don't get pulled over, from their barn to the lake to launch the boat or whatever. So, it's a relatively nominal fee. You might as well just do it and
Yeah, right.
take the risk out of it.
Maybe that's their little piece of adventure in their lives.
Yeah.
See if they feel like they can get away with
Right.
something.
Yeah, you're going 1.5 miles to the launch, so they're taking their chances.
Yeah. Trends and future of boating. Do you see any current trends in the boating industry?
Yeah, we've slowed down on the sales side for sure. People are, like I said earlier, kind of hanging on to their current boats a little longer, possibly. New boats have just gotten so expensive. There's a lot of new inventory sitting around. But as far as trends, you do see a little bit of a trend towards electric boats. Elk Rapids Marina here locally has a couple electric boat lines.
Really?
I don't have any experience taking those boats out, but you do see a little bit more of that. It can be a little bit of a hassle right now because there's not the same infrastructure for charging and that kind of thing. So that's one of those considerations you have to make if you are looking at an electric version of the make or model you're looking at. So.
Yeah, I think it was on AM 580, them talking about electric vehicles that are on, let's say, a ferry, like the Badger going over to Wisconsin. And that when these electric cars start on fire, they can just randomly start on fire as they're parked. And you can't put that fire out.
Yep.
And that, they were talking about that, and my mind went to the Badger because I had taken that a couple different times last summer and thinking to myself, man, if an electric car bursts into flames on the Badger, what are they going to do?
Sure.
And I wonder if the same thing, obviously if you're out in a boat, maybe you just need to jump overboard or something, but you're probably not going to burn down with it. But,
no, I don't know, I should probably do a little more research on the electric boat side of things, but I just don't know. I've not read or heard of any experiences people have had locally with battery fires or anything, but most newer boats are going to come with automated fire extinguisher systems too, so I would imagine there might be something similar for electric boats, but again, I know what you're referring to, where those, I think, lithium-ion batteries are near impossible to put out. Most folks are going to have available to them for fire extinguishing.
Yeah. What advancements in boat technology have you seen lately?
Yep, so the electric boat side is one for sure. There's actually some systems out there now for self-docking. So if you've seen automotive
like
industry,
car park,
you have parallel parking, but for boats, same idea. You can it's a combination of kind of GPS control if your boat's got a bow thruster, or the IPS systems, which are pods which operate independently of each other. You can hit essentially a park button and it'll sideways dock itself. So a lot of the newer, bigger boats have the joystick systems on them. You're starting to see those a little more on, like sub 30-foot vessels now too.
Rather than a wheel.
It will still have the steering wheel, but it'll also have just a literal joystick where you can, you twist it and the boat shifts sideways or it spins in place. So there's all sorts of cool systems, Garmin is kind of the big one that I think most people are familiar with, but Volvo engine systems are kind of at the forefront of those self-docking, self-piloting.
Let's go back to first-time boat buyers.
Sure.
What are some common mistakes that first-time boat buyers make?
Sure. Really the big one is I go back to that idea of, you should be looking to buy the boat that fits your 90% use case rather than your 10% use case. You get people who come in and they have this grand idea. And I'll speak to a recent example where a customer comes in, they have this dream of doing the Great Loop. They've never owned a boat, they've never, even been on any sort of overnight boating trip, and yet they want to go from the Great Lakes down to Florida and back up through the Mississippi River. Probably not the best thing for a first-time boat buyer to try to, take on themselves. So buy something a little smaller, buy something that's going to fit that use where you're, you're out on West Bay a handful of times a year, just out for the day with your family. That's your 90% use. Your 10% or even less in this instance is that idea of doing that big, multi-month long boat trip. So that's kind of an extreme example, but yeah, pick something that's going to check all those boxes or more boxes for your family.
Yep. What are some tips for negotiating the best price or for getting a boat at the best price?
Yep. So like I mentioned, right now the new boat market is slowed. The dealers are sitting on a lot of inventory. A lot more rebates are happening on the backside. So manufacturers are offering rebates to new boat dealers and buyers.
So right there, knowing the market.
Knowing the market.
And in this case, right now, probably it's a better market for buyers to look at new than used because people are hanging on to their used.
Yeah, I would say the new boat market is still so, kind of out of whack just because prices have risen so much in the last 4 years. You're still looking at a very hefty price tag, even with some of those rebates and incentives coming from manufacturers. But again, if it's not a price point issue, absolutely. Maybe you're thinking used, look new right now because there are a lot of dealers that are looking to, offload inventory and place their orders for the next model year. Used stuff, just take your time and find what's going to fit your use. There's a lot of inventory out there, private sale, a lot of stuff listed with brokers. So it is certainly a buyer's market right now. Take your time, find what's going to be the best use for your family.
So when someone's thinking about buying, the focus is going to be on the purchase price. You've already mentioned several times the different things that you recommend in terms of a maintenance schedule. So from a budgeting perspective, what should a first-time boat buyer have in mind about what maintenance and other costs are going to do other than just what the boat's price tag is?
Yep. So, again, it depends a little bit on where your mind is at as far as what type of storage or what type of off-season maintenance program you're going to implement. But on a very basic level, typically storage is going to be on a square foot basis. So if it's indoor heated storage, it's going to be X amount of dollars multiplied by the width and length of your boat. If there's a trailer involved, that's typically added on there as well. Same for cold storage. That's going to be a little less than heated storage, obviously. And then again, it's the same thing for most outdoor storage facilities too. They're charging based on square footage of your boat. They've got a finite amount of space on their lot, so they're trying to maximize the amount of revenue they're generating. But again, shop around. You can find places that are maybe priced a little more competitively for all three of those type of storage options. And same with the maintenance side of things too. Some of them are going to wrap that into storage where it's just a flat rate for winterization and storage. Some of them are going to have it as an a la carte service where they're pricing each individual service option and storage as a separate piece. So, gather all that information, ask those questions, what's included, what's not included, and make sure you're, well informed before you go and sign those storage contracts.
Yeah, okay. So environmental sustainability and kind of just environmental impact of boating type questions. What do boat owners need to be aware of in terms of just being a good steward of the environment while they use their boat?
Yeah, I mean, the big one is making sure, from time to time you might have a leak, whether that's from your drive or, you spill a little gas at the fuel dock. Being really conscientious about getting those cleaned up and being a good steward to the environment is important. A couple seasons ago, I noticed there was a slight sheen on the water behind my boat. Come to find out, I needed to have some work done on the trim assembly. Doing that in a timely manner so you're not polluting the marina or that lake environment is important. But typically, it's pretty visible. If you see fuel on the water, it's going to expand quickly. So identifying that source or that cause is important to do sooner than later.
Yeah. And then what about, I know, it's been a while since I have been boating, but, wasn't as much of a thing back, 20, 25 years ago when I was boating. But now I'm seeing wash stations at different places. What are those invasive species? What are we trying to avoid by washing the boat after you take it out, before you put it back in a different place?
Yeah, there's been a big push on a lot of inland lake associations to have those wash stations implemented for that reason. So you're not going for, you may pick up some invasive species on one lake, you're headed to a different lake the next day. That association obviously doesn't want those invasive species in their body of water. So they've implemented those wash stations so that you can really thoroughly clean the bottom of your boat, clean your engine off. If it's a PWC, same thing, hose those off good, get them cleaned up before they dump in that next lake. So
PWC is personal watercraft?
Yep, Sea-Doo, Yamaha jet skis.
Okay. Yeah, do you happen to know, I know I'm putting you on the spot, do you happen to know what some of those invasive species are?
Yeah,
milfoil.
Milfoil is the one that kind of popped into my brain because I think they had a little bit of an issue on Lake Leelanau with that here locally. Yeah. And they've come up with some pretty creative solutions where they're putting tarps of some description over big sections of the lake to block sunlight to then kill those, invasive species at the bottom of the lake. So I think, unfortunately, once those things are in the body of water, it's hard to fully eliminate them, but a lot of those places in the DNR is included in that are taking steps to remedy or fix that.
Yeah. So is there anything I didn't ask that you'd like to share with the viewers?
Really, we're here, so my office is here at CenterPointe Marina in Traverse City. I'm happy to chat, talk boating if you want to stop by. There's a handful of other dealers and brokers in the building, so it's a great boating community here. You've got the 3 marinas right in a row, Harbor West, CenterPointe, and then Elmwood Township Marina.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So Harbor West, I sold a dock in Harbor West about a year ago.
Okay.
Went for $140,000. So that's a private marina.
Private marina, yeah. Those are condo slips essentially with kind of the marina equivalent of an HOA. So there's monthly dues, there's assessments potentially if they're looking to make improvements throughout the entire marina. So Harbor West is a privately.
And is CenterPointe also?
CenterPointe is private, but there's a parent company that owns the office building that we're sitting in right now and the marina itself. So all of the slips that you see here at CenterPointe are leased. So they're not owned by individuals, they're owned by the parent company of this office complex. And then those individuals are leasing them from that company.
And then you have Elmwood Township.
Elmwood Township Marina is a publicly owned marina owned by Elmwood Township here on that kind of northwest side of Traverse City. And those are similar in that they're leased season to season from the township. So that government entity owns Elmwood Township Marina. And typically you, as an individual, if your name comes up on the wait list or whatever, that's your slip until you decline it or
then you go to the bottom.
Then you go to the bottom.
My brother's been on the list for a slip in the Northport Marina for 20 years.
Okay. Yeah, that's it. And, some of the public marinas will actually publish their lists if you go on the website, and you can see exactly where you would be at if you were to sign up to get on the wait list. And for the most part, yes, they're multi-year, probably a minimum of 4 or 5 years.
Sort of like the Chinese proverb, the best time to have planted a tree, or in this case, to have signed up to get on a boat slip, was 20 years ago.
Yes.
The second best time is today.
And here at CenterPointe, we can help with that process. But if you're interested in getting on at Elmwood or even Clinch Harbor Marina down in Traverse City, do it today.
Yeah, for sure. Even if like the one that I sold it to a guy I've known for a lot of years, and he didn't have a boat.
yet. But he's one of those guys. He's going to buy the slip before he buys the boat.
Make sure you got a spot to put it.
Yeah, make sure you have a spot to put it for sure. Yeah, so basically, if anyone's considering either selling a boat that they've had, or they're looking to buy a boat and they want some expert guidance through that process, reach out to you.
Yeah, and I'm happy to chat. If you end up wanting to go private sale, totally understand that. But I do think there's an advantage of having somebody who has some experience in the industry. And so right now, kind of my focus for the most part is on brokerage listings and sales. But I do right now have a partnership in process for a brand of new pontoons, a new pontoon line here locally, and then I have a kind of the same handshake agreement right now in place with a company that sells a big center console line. So
you're also kind of a dealer in those types of lines.
Yeah, it's not that formal quite yet, but I do have access to a brand of new pontoons, a new pontoon line, which I can talk about, if you want to give me a call. And then same for center consoles, so 28 to about 41 feet if you're interested in a big center console.
So it's not something you can really talk about on public YouTube, but if people want to find out more, they need to just chat with you individually.
Yeah, they're kind of handshake agreements at this point, and I'm working on...
You don't want to jeopardize that.
Potentially.
By all the millions of viewers that I have on my YouTube
channel. So it's exciting, and then hopefully for calendar year 2025, we'll have something a little more formal and concrete in place. But I do have access to a couple lines of new boats as well. So
awesome. Well, Sanders, I appreciate it. Actually, I should put this in there, but you and I used to work together at Traverse City Area Public Schools. I was an elementary principal. You were in charge of early child care. And if you still, I think maybe now, since I have moved out of education and I'm in real estate and there's been enough activity there, but it used to be you Googled my name in Westwoods and that violation that we had came up of a kid who escaped.
Right.
And oh gosh, that was so scary. It all turned out well, but...
Well, and I have a quick story too, just with the name similarity. So my now wife, Claire, her uncle Ron emailed us the week before we got married to congratulate Sanders Scott and Claire, because he's getting up there in age and knew your name because he's a local gentleman, but mixed up our names. And actually, I probably still have the email said congrats to Sanders Scott for marrying his niece Claire. So there's that tie-in and confusion out there as well.
Yeah, because my last name is Scott, people often call me Sanders because when I introduce myself, so now I've gotten to the point where I really put an extra long pause in when I say, what's your name? It's Sander. And if I'm filling, if I'm going in to buy something or whatever, Sander, and Sander is my first name.
Yeah.
And then Scott, but if I say Sanders Scott, they hear Sanders as the first name. But
and it's probably 50-50, but I also go by Sandy as well. That's my mom calls me Sandy, my brother calls me Sanders, and everywhere in between, but it's probably about 50-50. So I get either or is fine. It's both are on my business card. So.
Okay. But I bet you people don't call you Frye.
No, typically no.
Yeah, see, everybody calls me Scott.
Yeah.
By accident. I'll say my name, hi Scott, And, my brother said to me one time, my brother's name is Stephen. And he says, I understand why people do that to you. Because you've got, what most people would consider probably more of a traditional last name, which was Sander being last name. He said, but I can't figure out why they do it to me.
Right.
And Scott is just such a name that people hang on to as a first name, I think. But he'll introduce himself as Steve Scott, and they'll say, nice to meet you, Scott. And so anyway, there are two other Sander, they don't have an S at their name, they share my name. One of them's the Sander Van Oker.
Okay.
Or no, I'm sorry, that's a TV personality. Sander Weckstein. Dr. Sander Weckstein, who's a child psychiatrist. I think he prescribed, maybe psychologist. I can't remember if he prescribes medicine or not. But and then there was a medical doctor that practiced for a short time up in Northport, Dr. Sander or something. And when I went in with my son,
I made note of that. And he said, well, actually, and I said, there's only one other sander that I know of in the area, and that's Dr. Sander Wexstein. And he says, well, that's my son-in-law.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it was a tight little circle there.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, boats, give you a call.
Yeah.
Right?
Stop by CenterPointe and let's talk boats.
Yeah. And so that's one thing. This always appeared, by the way, CenterPointe is the building with the seagulls on it.
Yes.
You know, that for years and years I drive by this building and I never knew what to call it, you know. But it's the big seagull building that is up against the marinas, and
I think the full name is CenterPointe Marina and Office Complex.
Okay.
So yeah, there's a big, the office complex here, there's a bunch of CPAs, attorneys, there's a handful of boat, dealers and brokers.
You have an awesome view.
Yeah, it's a great spot to be in the summer for sure, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right.